Good morning. Welcome to the Ranger's Roost. My name is Tecker10. Uh, that's my gaming handle. It's Monday morning. I'm going to have a sip of water. Please excuse me. My name is Tennyson E. Stead. I'm the creator of Jump Rangers. This is a weekly show where I sit down and talk about whatever's on my mind or whatever comes from chat. And it's been kind of a busy week here in Los Angeles. There's been a lot going on, personally and professionally, and quite a lot of it isn't baked yet. So there isn't necessarily anything to show people, um, and there's a lot of personal life lessons underway right now as well. They're also not baked yet, but I guess I guess the thing to talk about this week is just self care. Um, Obviously, there's been a lot in the news that might have people feeling very anxious, and that's been pretty steadily the case, honestly, for the last decade or so. Um, and before that, I was dealing with traumatic brain injury and everything else, homelessness and all kinds of other stuff. So I've been in a cycle of anxiety really pretty steadily since 2013. I haven't sort of had a moment to gather myself or feel safe. And I've sort of accepted that that's part of the process. And I've done some pretty amazing things in that space. And at the same time, um, I'm not getting any younger. My my health is a growing concern for me, and I need to be smarter in terms of how I manage my well-being. So that's been a big focus for the last week. And I don't know if anybody else has experienced this. I think probably, you know, as a man growing up in this society, I'm I probably am coming at this from a little bit behind in the race. Men are, I think, in some parts of our country at least, kind of actively discouraged from mastering their self care um, because systems of patriarchy rely on the labor of women to do that work. And if we don't sort of trap women in doing the self care meant for them, they have a lot more time and a lot more resources to pursue their own goals. And that's not always something society wants, right? So, oh, Steve, hi. How are you? I thought I was winging it solo today. It's been a it's been a self care week for sure. A lot of reflection. Yeah, I was getting that too. Let me see if it's the speaker. Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Is that any better? Maybe that's better. A little. Test, test, test. Huh. Test, test. Okay. There we go. There we go. Ah, how's your week going? Not too bad. Good. Very good. Um, Both Ippy Looney and I have been kind of refocusing our lives a bit this week, which has been good. You love world building? Is that what you're doing now? Are you working on your game setting? Nope, eating a banana. Very good. Very good. Yeah, I like world building too. I like world building too. It's been I just actually I posted an article this morning on Stage 32, which is something I know. I wrote it for Stage 32. I posted it on LinkedIn this morning about kind of best practices in world building for film. Um, and I think one of the big selling points in that article was that a lot of people make the mistake of, oh, my comment, I'm not quite that random. No, I understand. Well, look, it's good to share your passions. You want to talk about world building today? Is that what you want to talk about? We can talk about world building. Um, that's actually been kind of a theme this week. I wound up in a conversation on a server on Discord yesterday about world building. Just posted an article today, so if that's a topic of conversation you want to get into, then let's get into it. Is there any particular questions you have? Anything you're struggling with in world building? Except politics, because that is too exhausting. Yeah. It's been an adventure this week in the United States for sure. I am, you know, committed to helping as much as I can, and at the same time, I'm also committed to getting my wife out of the country if it becomes necessary to do so. Yeah. Well, we're figuring out how. I'll put it to you that way. I don't think I'm quite at the point where I can honestly say I'm taking good care of myself, but I'm working on figuring out where to start. And I think it's important to do so, for sure, because less and less I think we have. Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact. Well, let me bring up my article on world building and see, and I'll just read it and see if there's anything that sticks out as something that I can elaborate on. This is what I posted earlier today. Um, how to build a universe from scratch. And I'm gonna put my glasses on. So this article was originally published on Stage 32. Because I've been knee deep in projects of my own and tied up with more script doctor work than I've had the chance to reflect on, it's been longer than usual since my last blog for Stage 32. So before I start telling everybody how to do their jobs, let me say this. I hope you're keeping yourself healthy. I hope you're keeping yourself sane. No matter what happens with our nation's politics, I want you to know that your stories matter. Telling rich, powerful stories and telling them well is how we teach our audience to value one another, to rely on one another, and to use one another's strengths to build a better future. If the voice in your head tells you that it's not like you're curing cancer here is getting loud, check out my last blog post on what culture is, how it works, and why content creators like us absolutely need to take personal responsibility for it. How we screwed the showbiz culture up. Okay, enough sap. Let's talk about world building. A little about myself. Professor Tennyson. Yes, well, you'd be surprised how often Professor Tennyson is a character. Um, Science fiction and modern fantasy have always been the genres I commit myself to most readily. Most of you don't know this about me, but I was writing tabletop role playing games before I committed myself to writing directing films. Way back when, my theater education was very heavily focused on design and dramaturgy. My favorite movies were always the films that demonstrated a specific eye for world building, not just Star Wars, but the Alien films. 2001, Peter Hyams movies like Outland in 2010. Millennium is still a movie that captures my imagination, and the first game I wrote was my answer to that film's aesthetic hooks. its fascinatingly specific approach to time travel, and its painful litany of squandered opportunities. Yeah, it's compelling to be able to stretch your imagination in any direction, to just be able to walk in any direction. Oh, come on. First of all, I imagine you're you're pretty aware of the rules. I imagine you have a pretty solid grasp of the gameplay. I have a lot of confidence in you as a storyteller, Steve. So let's see here. So yes, world building is a skill I've been honing since I was old enough to write, and I learned to write very early on. Over the last several months, my clients have been bringing me stories and screenplays that lean very heavily on this particular toolbox. So today I wanted to cover some of the basics and hopefully to empower writers to be more creative and more articulate in their approach to genre cinema. And it's important to note that these specific ideas apply to genre cinema, but I think there's some more generally applicable stuff here. Before we do this, I want to mention that my whole approach to filmmaking builds on the classical principles of scene work and dramatic structure. If any of you haven't heard my rants on the importance of active writing, I'll ask you to check out my article on why I passed on that screenplay. In cinema, everything is action. When it comes to world building, believing otherwise will only get you into trouble. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning. What is world building? When people talk about the cleverness of films like Star Wars, the Avengers movies, Lord of the Rings, or the filmographies of directors like Tim Burton, Guillermo del Toro, and Neil Blomkamp, what these people are noticing is the level of detail and attention that goes into making the worlds these characters inhabit feel real, lived in, and believable. While a good amount of the credit for these achievements very rightly goes to the production designers and visual effects artists who craft the imagery of these worlds, the reality of these universes extends into the languages these characters use, to the lighting, to the costume designers and props artists, to the casting itself, and to the manner in which the actors accept the reality with which their characters are presented. World building is a team effort, and it falls on the director to make sure that everyone working on the project is capable of building on the logic of one another's creative efforts, rather than breaking that logic and undermining the credibility of the film. When we talk about films occupying a universe, world building is the work that goes into actually creating that universe for the audience. In the case of licensed content, we can look to the source material to help us with world building. If you ever make a Marvel movie, you'll have decades of content informing your work. Much of your job will involve finding the details that make your film indelibly a piece of that universe, and then adapting those details to film. If you make a movie like Star Wars or Avatar, on the other hand, then a big part of your job will be wrapped up in making your universe look just as rich and developed as the comic book content that people have been working on for decades. I believe started from Tolkien's love of language and creating the Elven languages. Well, I think you're probably right. I think he's actively denied, resoundingly denied that it's an allegory for World War II, right? But I imagine his personal experience had a lot to do as well with how that story came about. And at the same time, once you've sort of started seeing a world grow, I think it's important to not write to theme. Here, I think we're about to get into that. So, cinema is not literature. Probably the single most common mistake that directors make when building worlds for their films is to hinge their creative choices on the themes they want to see reflected in the story. Say a director wants to make a movie about the dangers of corporate overreach. Say they make a movie with a big evil corporation. Working in that corporation, people face a simple if difficult choice. Either they fall in line with the evils their company is perpetuating, or they start looking for ways to rebel. Along the way, inevitably, the company starts feeling too silly, cheesy, and manufactured for the audience to ever take the plight of these characters very seriously. When we see movies based on Ray Bradbury books, for example, they usually seem pretty goofy. But why, though? Ray Bradbury is one of the most respected authors in the history of science fiction literature. His books are taught in schools, for crying out loud. What works in literature doesn't work on film. On the page, theme is what holds a story together. Stringing a bunch of observations, ideas, and events together on a strong, Load-bearing theme, provided it's well written, is exactly how you write enduring literature. On screen or on stage, a story is defined by the efforts of a protagonist to achieve a goal that's personal, urgent, and so overwhelmingly challenging that it forces that protagonist to reinvent themselves. On screen, the themes are a product of the action. In fact, everything is a product of the action, and so the actions of those who came before. Going back to the aforementioned evil corporation for a moment, we need to remember that a corporation is a tool used by people to achieve a goal. Why was the corporation founded? Who is running that corporation now, and who hired this person? What was the CEO hired to do specifically? What is this leader trying to achieve with the company they've inherited? In turn, what kinds of people is this leader hiring? Even if this person is doing despicable things, there's a good chance this person doesn't see themselves as a villain. Instead, they're taking a tool that was designed to accomplish specific goals, and they're either trying to advance that mission or they're trying to adapt it to a changing world. All these details and all these actions are essentially what will determine the corporate culture inside this company. How are the employees expected to feel about their work? What kind of training do they receive? All these things depend on what people who run this company are trying to accomplish. Don't build the company out of themes, build it out of actions. That's what I'm saying. Worlds are made of action. Political systems, economic systems, law enforcement, technology, and even things like magic and superpowers are ultimately just tools that people use to achieve their goals. Also, people have a hard time accepting things that go on in the world. I mean, Amazon is effectively an evil corporation. Well, and so there's, when it comes to film, the important thing to remember is that actors perform actions, okay? Life is full of different kinds of truths. And we have to express certain truths in certain media because the media that we're using lends itself to expressing those truths. So, for example, and this is something I like to use when I'm mentoring screenwriters, the story of Nelson Mandela. In literature and even in his own autobiography, he explains that story basically as I was thrown in prison and then I became president. And here's how that happened. Here's the forces that pushed me and here's how I pushed back. And that's a good piece of literature because literature is about taking a theme and putting it on a character, putting impression on a character and seeing how they handle it, for example, right? But in film, it actually takes the action away from the character. What it says in a movie is that Nelson Mandela was created by the white regime, the white supremacist regime of South Africa. But that's not fair to him. It's not just to say that. It puts the onus of the story on the white people. Making leverage, John Rogers often took stuff from the headlines, but usually ended up toning it down because he figured the audience was going to buy what was really going on. It's not exactly that. It's not about things being too pulpy. It's not a tonal problem. Okay? It's about action versus reaction. When you have reactive characters, it feels like they're selling something. When you have active characters, they pull the audience into the story with them. So, in the case of Nelson Mandela, it's true. He was thrown in prison and became president. That's true. From a certain perspective, you could say that him running a political career was a reaction. However, if you take a step back and you say, okay, what was he really trying to do, and did it start with him getting thrown in prison? A natural question becomes, why was he thrown in prison? Well, Nelson Mandela went to law school in Johannesburg in the 1940s, trained himself as a lawyer, and started representing families in court, black families. Can we think of a reason why he might have been thrown in prison? you don't you don't get a law degree in Johannesburg as a black man in 1940 unless you're looking to affect social change. That's not a job that you take thinking, oh, it's going to be I'll provide for my family. No, like you go lay bricks if you want to provide for your family. You keep your head down. He was looking to represent people in court, and he did effectively. They threw him in jail because he was winning cases and getting under people's feet. He had already started leading. He'd already started trying to improve his community and make things better for people. And when he got to jail, he didn't stop. He didn't wait for opportunities to affect social change in prison. He started teaching the guards how to help him and why they should. And he had to find those people who were willing to basically give him beatings so that he could slip them messages for his wife and Desmond Tutu. He started building systems, educating people, and convincing people to help him get messages out of prison so he could start building a social movement, or at least start figuring out what was next. And the social movement was the next step from there. So ultimately, he never stopped making an effort to improve his community, and his story, from a film standpoint, can be about his effort to improve his community and how it interfered with the efforts of the people in power to further their goals. And even their goals aren't static. They're not trying to protect a stagnant system. I mean, maybe they are, but they're also trying to do something else. They're trying to build relationships with the West. They're trying to create a political impression. Maybe the judge that threw him in prison was trying to build a career. Maybe they owed somebody a favor. Why did they owe somebody a favor? Because they were trying to do X and they needed resources and they put themselves in debt. It's always about what a character is trying to get to and not what a character is trying to get away from in film. And the point that I'm making here is that these principles apply. They apply to world building because they make everything more specific, right? So another sort of thought exercise that I like to do when I'm mentoring screenwriters is to talk about a movie where someone is running for president in a dictatorial country. Well, thematically, yes. Thematically, that's part of the conversation, but it's not necessarily about the ideas. The ideas, if you have a story built on strong actions, strong efforts, then the themes will come very naturally from that conversation. So if we tell a story about Nelson Mandela, for example, trying to strengthen his community and make things better for black people in South Africa, it's really hard not to confront the idea that things might not be great for people black people in South Africa. It's hard not to confront the concept of injustice. And maybe um, to whatever degree the justice system is part of that problem, it's going to be relevant because he's trying to use the justice system. To whatever degree the political system is part of that problem, it's going to be relevant because he's trying to use the political system. So it's not that you're dipping into these story elements in order to cast a light on certain themes. That's not how cinema works. What is the character trying to accomplish? How do they accomplish it? How does a person do what that person's trying to do? Let them, that thing has to be overwhelmingly challenging because otherwise you won't stir the soup. There won't be anything going on. The actor has to be doing something overwhelmingly hard. I understand. Well, it is how you build these stories in literature. You say, "Oh, I'm interested in criminal justice. So let me have people try to arrest this character. Let me throw the criminal justice system at this character." That's how literature works. And it works well. And actually there's a reason for that. This is the reason the book is always better than the movie. It's because the things that make literature good actually undermine the relationship between the actor and the audience. The things that make literature good are not the things that make stories good on stage and screen. And um, in literature, we create good stories basically by making observations. We have a character, we have a theme, and we watch how that theme affects that character. Right? And we make observations. We say, okay, this is this is happening and this is bad. This is happening and this is good. This is happening and this is interesting. And then we keep the reader's attention. We keep them reading by juxtaposing themes against each other. So, for example, if you have, you know, nobility and injustice on the same page, you have a noble character and injustices are being put upon them. That's fair. That's fair, but it's a trend. It's a clear trend, right? And it's because the mechanics, the story mechanics that lead to good literature actually do not lead to good cinema. And a lot of people don't know how to make that adaptation. And what we're talking about here is good literature, good journalism, actually good stand-up. It's all about making these observations. And we juxtapose themes in those observations against each other to keep people wondering what's going to happen next, and that keeps them turning pages. So in film, the problem is that audiences come to watch. They don't want our observations because they're coming to watch. They want to make their own observations. So we have to build stories out of something else, right? We don't make a story about what happens to our characters. Yes. Oh, I see. I see. Okay. Wow. Interesting. I haven't read the book. I haven't read the book. I see. I see. Well, it's it's not a surprising example because I know you're very passionate about that show. Steve Kane is saying that The Magicians is a classic example of anybody who's not seeing this live. Magicians is a classic example of a show that's better than the novel. I have no idea. I haven't read the novel, um, but I imagine there's a reason why it was produced into a television show. I don't know how popular the novel was either. Something must have been up with it, you know. The one thing I do know about The Magicians that I love is the book is very bleak, very depressing, and the characters are very unlikable. Oh, I see. I see. So it was a little bit more of an edge lord approach to fantasy. Yeah, and that was never at that point in time, especially sci-fi was looking to provide levity as a I wonder why they acquired the book. Hmm. Interesting. Almost the point of being depressing for the sake of depressing. Yeah, fair. Well, I think that oh, I wonder. I'm gonna look it up right now. Who wrote The Magicians? Guy named Lev Grossman. Let's see here. His recent work. He also worked on the show. Children's book The Silver Hour and the screenplay for the film The Map of Tiny Perfect Things based on his short story. Born in 1969, twin brother of video game designer and novelist Austin Grossman. So he was a journalist. Okay. He was a journalist who went into kids' literature. Okay. Well, I haven't read the books. I can't say. But well, if he worked on the show, then he couldn't have been too. You know, if he did work in journalism, then he had some idea of what he was getting himself into with with the production of the show. Whatever tonal changes sci-fi made to the show were probably made with his consent at that point because I can't imagine that he was terrifically shocked to find out how media companies work after all of his success as a journalist. And specifically writing for magazines like Wired, I imagine he did his fair share of entertainment journalism. So, it was probably part of his plan for the show, for the book to get it produced as television content. I love Don Burgess. I'm always happy to see him getting work. He and I worked together at ArcLight for a while, and he got some work out of The Magicians. So I will always be happy with The Magicians on that basis. Adaptation is the key rather than trying to. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And that's kind of what we were talking about, is that you have to take a story like we did with Nelson Mandela. You have to take a story that people understand as about being what happened to the characters, and you have to find a way to make it about what the characters did. You have to kind of turn the story inside out and make it about the efforts of the characters to accomplish their goals. And sometimes that means taking a step back and trying to figure out what those goals actually were. If you know, if this story had been the fault of the protagonist, why? What would the protagonist have been trying to do that created these? If you found a way to say they did this, this is all their fault, because so much about literature is about, you know, oh well, this force came into this person's life and changed them and this and that. It's always about what happens. But if you make a movie or a television show about what happens to the characters, then the audience is waiting for the next thing to happen. If you make a show about what the characters are doing to accomplish their goals, then the audience watches the characters do those things. And it's a very different relationship between the actor and the audience. Fallout show is doing so well as they aren't trying to retell any of the games. Yes, I I I am gonna steer clear of that show for obvious reasons. I have my own relationship when it comes to the Fallout video game franchise and television production. I'm good. I'll pass. I'm kind of excited to see Borderlands, though, which is obviously very heavily influenced. I'm looking forward to that. I still haven't watched Halo. Maybe it's a good time for me to catch up on Halo. I think I need to get Paramount Plus in general. My wife hasn't ever really gotten into Star Trek, so it might be time. Might be time. Let's see. Yeah, I agree. Well, I agree that's important. I agree it's important to. So what Steve Kane is saying is the reason the Fallout show is doing well is because they're building a new story in the world, and I think personally that's my approach to adapting game content to TV and film. I just finished writing a Jump Rangers novel. I'm in the process of editing it now, and I didn't want the novel to provide like a meta plot for the game because I don't want the novel to lock players into serving specific roles in a specific narrative. I wanted the novel to be events that took place that had an effect on the universe. Maybe I might. I haven't seen Strange New Worlds and I haven't seen Discovery. I want to catch up on Discovery because I know some of the people on the production. Um, but and I know people aren't fond of it, and I'm suspicious, about why that might be. People have a hard time seeing people of color in leading roles these days, and especially women. And I want to see for myself. I want to see for myself. So I'm looking forward to that. It's one of the very few shows that I'm still watching. I've heard really great things about it, and I also want to catch up on Prodigy because I haven't watched any of it, and a good friend of mine is on Prodigy as well. Um, but there's a lot. There's a lot for me to see. Okay. All right. So it's a little bit of a slog at first. I think probably I will start my wife off on maybe Voyager. I think Voyager might be Ippy speed. There's a lot of whimsy, but a lot of stakes. There's some great performances. I think that's a good place to start. Um, what else to say? What else to say? I don't know. You got any questions before we wrap this up, Mr. Kane? You got any? Okay. You got any thoughts to share? Any questions before we ring the dinner bell? My brain isn't even booted up yet. I have a game to run later today. I need to get myself woken up. Season 4 of Discovery at some point. Well, I know they're proud of it. I know they're proud of it. All right. I'm going to get some food before I start getting too late in the day. Thank you for joining me, Steve. I hope you have a fantastic day. I think this was a good talk. I enjoyed it. Thank you for being here. You do the same. Don't be a stranger, Ranger.